Today's show is being taped on Thursday, March 10th, 2005, and my guest today is Rena Krasno. She is an author and has had the unique experience of living in Shanghai, China during World War II under Japanese occupation. Rena, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
You've written a number of books, and the one book I really wanted to kind of focus on is a book called Strangers Always, and this is really a diary, a diary that you had kept when you lived in Shanghai, from the period you were born in Shanghai. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born in Shanghai. My father was a writer,
okay.
A poet and a writer, and he was the editor of a newspaper. And so I kept a diary from the age of 8.
Oh, okay.
So I've been always writing down little things.
Okay.
And later on, when I wanted to write a book, when I arrived in the States about it, and everybody told me my book would never get published, you know, and I never listened, as I never do. But
right.
In any case, I wrote a book using my diary and at the same time doing research.
I see.
So it was a very interesting experience for me.
Okay. Your parents were married in Shanghai in 1921.
Yes.
Is that correct? And you were born
23.
23, okay.
Yes.
And you lived in Shanghai from 1923 until
49.
Until 49. Okay.
We were stateless.
Mm-hmm.
We had no passports. So we really couldn't travel when we lived in Shanghai, except for summer vacations we went to Japan.
Oh, okay.
There was a special arrangement with Japan.
Oh, I see.
In 1949, we left China for Israel because at that time Israel had become independent.
Right.
And anybody who was Jewish could go there.
I see.
Because had we waited for an American visa, and my sister and I were born in China and came under the Chinese quota, we'd still be waiting till today, probably.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right.
So it gave us a chance, and my parents were under the Russian quota.
Yeah.
So what happens was quotas were according to places where you were born.
Right.
So families risked being broken up.
Right,
That
right.
was another additional problem after the war.
Right, right. Now you're considered a stateless Russian Jew. Is that correct? Or
Stateless Russian.
stateless Russian.
Russian.
Okay. Okay.
And what happened was the Russians came, stateless Russians came, and stateless Russian Jews came
Yes.
together. And at first they were in one group, and then later the Jews had started a separate community where, for example, they registered births of children and so on.
Right.
It was important because, for example, a birth certificate, if you want to become an American citizen,
Right.
you need it from somewhere.
Yes.
And we had some sort of official papers.
I see.
But throughout the war,
Yeah.
what happened was when the war started and the Japanese occupied Shanghai, and they arrested all the British, American, all the so-called enemy nationals, we were free, but we had nobody to protect us.
Right.
You know, we're just sort of hanging around hoping for the best in
Right.
Shanghai. So in a way, some of us sort of envied the people who went to camps because at least they were identified
I
and they
see.
went in groups together.
I see. So you said your father was a writer.
Yes.
But in your book, you point out that he couldn't find employment. It was very hard to find employment at that time. And your mother was the one who kind of helped bring in money.
That was during the war. Before the war, my father worked for a British company.
Yes.
And then, of course, the British were enemy nationals.
Yes.
The Japanese took over all the British companies, and all the British people were in various camps. And then it was very hard to find employment. My
Yes.
father refused to do anything to work with the Japanese.
Yes.
So he worked in the free of charge
Yeah.
in the Jewish community because we soon got many, many refugees that had to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And he published and edited a cultural magazine for which he didn't get paid.
Yes.
My mother agreed to start a business, but it was a toy shop
Right.
because she said she doesn't care what nationality the children are.
Right.
And you know,
It was a toy shop?
toy shop. It
Called
was,
Peter Pan.
Yes, and many people thought that she was married to a Chinese called Mr. Pan, which was really very funny.
Right.
And I personally studied throughout the war. I went to the university, and my sister studied too. So,
Yes.
you know, our lives were sort of concentrated on what we were doing.
Yes. You went to the French school? Is that what
I went to the French school. We lived in the French concession.
Okay.
And to pass all our exams, we had to pass them officially at the school, and our papers were sent to the Sorbonne for
Yes.
correction.
Oh.
So I have valid French you know, certificates and diplomas. And after that, I studied medicine in a French Jesuit university. The French were beaten by the Germans very early in the war, and then their consul was replaced by a pro-German consul who were allies of the Japanese, so I could continue studying.
I see. Wow. And you speak several languages. You speak French?
I speak French, English, Russian, German,
and German,
Hebrew,
wow.
Spanish.
That's terrific. You worked for the United Nations at one point? Was it UNESCO?
Yes.
Was it?
I worked for the UN for a certain period in Shanghai. It was called the United Nations Information Service.
I see.
And actually it was quite interesting because we had to write an essay to get the job. I won the prize. I got the job, and one of my jobs was to go with my boss, who was the information officer, and have a liaison between the Russian, which was the Soviet embassy, and the French and the British. And it was a very interesting job. Later on, I worked for UNESCO in Hamburg. It was the Institute for Education. There are only 2 UNESCO institutes like that. And then I worked for various international agencies as an interpreter. You know, I was an international interpreter.
Extraordinary.
I did it.
And of course, you're an author. You've written a total of 9 books so far?
No, I've written a total of 7 books.
7 books? Okay.
Yes. And I have 1 book that's at the publishers. And just got a contract yesterday, so that will be published.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we just quickly look at some of these books here. Oops. We have, this is The Last Glorious Summer, 1939. In Shanghai.
It's in Shanghai and Japan. That was a summer just before the war, when my mother took my sister and me to Japan, and we stayed in a village where nobody spoke English. And when we came back on the ship, war was declared.
I see.
And what I thought was interesting in that was that I was a young girl, a teenager, writing in my diary, and I saw all the war preparations in Japan, but I really didn't know what they were about. So there were very many interesting incidents that clarified things for me later on.
That's incredible. And you've written a number of, you've done some children's books. This is the Floating Lanterns and Golden Shrines, celebrating Japanese festivals.
It's
a picture book of sorts. I mean, this is...
Well, I'll tell you, the purpose of my children's books is to create bridges between different ethnic groups of children. I want all kids to feel wanted and at home. And I want the child to be proud of whatever his ethnic origin is, and other kids to appreciate it. So the books are really, they have information. They have history, they have folk tales, they have customs, and all kinds of facts. And the artist is always an artist from that country, and not somebody who just arrived in the States, because I feel they don't have the real feeling of the book.
I see.
So this one's about Japan, this one's about Korea.
This is about the Philippines?
Yes,
Philippines,
the Filipino
festivals.
Philippines, yes.
Okay, this is also another book for children?
For children, about 9 to 12 years old.
Yes, I see.
You know, and this one's about China, and actually we use the collection of old posters. I have a Chinese co-writer here. Her name is Yang Fong Cheng, and she has a collection of several thousand old Chinese posters, which are very rare, and we use them as a background for the stories. Selected the ones that have something to do with children's stories or legends or something like that.
I see. That's fantastic. So you're very interested in cross-cultural relations, obviously.
I am very interested in that.
And having the experience of having lived in Shanghai under Japanese occupation, you saw a lot of injustice too. You talk about that in your diary, in your book, about how the Chinese were kind of, it was their country, and yet they were treated like just third-class citizens. They didn't even exist in some ways to the Westerners who were there at the time.
Yes.